Hi, folks. This is a pre-recorded session. So what's going to happen is I'm going to be here in the chat with you, and I want this to be super interactive. I love this to be a ton of fun. I love to be going back and forth with you over the course of the presentation. So feel free to toss in comments, toss an emoji in the chat about how you're feeling right now and enjoying the conference. Toss a flag in for where you're from or where you call home. Let me know if you agree with what I'm saying, if you think it's controversial, if you think that you've got a different idea. Toss some emojis in and we can dig into it. I love to keep this conversation going after the presentation. But I'm here to present 5 reasons why I think value stream thinking is the future of DevOps. So what's coming next in DevOps? And I hope that this talk is about 500% better than a real life talk, because we're all here together, and I hope that that comes through. So really excited to be here, but let's get into it. So as leaders, I think, 2 really important questions kind of pop up at me on a regular basis, and they're challenging in the context of DevOps, right? There's a lot of answers to this. But it's important to answer these questions with your team and to talk about them with your team as well. For me, where are we aiming and how are we doing kind of point to these ideas of North Star, targets, objectives, target outcomes, where we want to go. And I see that as kind of an analogy for a compass. And this how are we doing is more about our environment, what's going on, what's happening right now. And I see that as a mapping sort of paradigm. So I love thinking in terms of compasses and maps, and that's hopefully what I can sort of layer on top of this idea of value stream thinking to bring you some really simple ideas about how this fits into the big picture of your organization and your teams and your leadership, to bring you to the next level. So I think, DevOps has brought us a long way. It's been about 10 years now. And, it really helped us deal with things like automation, scaling, and collaboration. But I think actually now more than ever, we're dealing with complexity, friction, and waste, right? These are huge, challenging problems. And it's as we've grown, as we've become more sophisticated, these are now bigger problems than ever. And, we hear statistics about things like 50% of your features are never used. So all of our automation and all of our scale and all of our ability to deliver may be just going to waste, if nobody's using our features. So that can mean that we have to deliver twice as fast or twice as much in order to have the same effect that we're hoping for when it comes to our customers. And I think this idea of customers, and whether it's internal customers or customers in the public, it's really valuable for us to put DevOps and our work in terms of customers, because it drives better outcomes, right? And that's something that I see value streams and value stream thinking layering on top of DevOps to ultimately get us to a better place. So who am I, and why should you care about any of this stuff? I started in IT a very long time ago. I've been through build and release. I've been through systems engineering. I've been CTO. I've been consulting. I've seen a lot of challenges from both sides of leadership and as an individual contributor, working through things like code and automation and scale and through the web. And so I've learned a lot on the way. I've learned a lot from failing to talk about value in the right way, to share the same view with my colleagues and leadership. I failed to really target my efforts at where it would be the most valuable. And I've certainly created my share of waste. I've automated things that had no business being automated. I've spent ages trying to optimize things that ultimately didn't move the needle. And so I think that all brought me to this idea that the value stream and thinking in terms of value streams really changes the game. It really helps us kind of avoid these problems that you might be seeing in your teams, you might be seeing in your own experience. And we certainly see more and more of, as we hear advice of automate everything and improving and increasing automation everywhere and increasing this complexity, we're just going to see these problems unless we have really solid techniques and strategies to avoid them. So what's in it for you? WIIFM, which is this radio station that a friend of mine pointed me to yesterday. But out of this talk, I'm hoping to really bring us beyond this idea of DevOps to a different level. It's sort of a zoomed out view, but also a zoomed in view that gives us a different perspective and a different capability when it comes to measurement, visualization, sharing, alignment, all of these things. So visibility is a major piece for me. This idea of measurement, how do we measure, what do we measure, where do we measure, and how do we make those measurements really valuable? And that brings us to value, right? How do we know that what we're doing is actually valued by our customers, whether our customers are internal, external, ourselves, right? How do we think of value? And how do we make sure that we're optimizing value all the time? And a lot of the value stream theory and the origins of this come from Toyota in the 60s. And there's a lot of history behind this in manufacturing, which doesn't really port apples to apples to something like software. But I think what you'll find the more you dig into this is that there's more in common than you might realize. And there's a lot that we can borrow from tons of history and progress in other areas like manufacturing and bring that to software. Not to make the process of building software robotic, but to allow us to focus as much creative time as we can by automating the things that are repetitive and are wasteful and unnecessary and not valuable. So, I'm a huge fan of DevOps. It was sort of the thing that really made tech kind of resonate for me because it's all about collaboration. It's all about sharing. It really brought a lot of value to software engineering to me and systems and pulled everything together. But, as a term, it means all these different things to different people, right? It's really challenging to have conversations about DevOps when it can be a silo, it can be a team, it can be an individual, it can be automation to one person, it's collaboration to another person, it's all these different things. But ultimately, what we're talking about flow, right? It's really valuable for us to talk about flow when we're talking about DevOps. And I think, the paradigm of a value stream is a lot easier to think about when we're looking at flow. There's obvious correlations there. And it allows us to really focus on, this enable step, this final stage of what we're trying to do. Enabling people is about adding value. And I think that, wrapping all this together in a single term in a bucket that means one thing to pretty much everyone you talk to is really helpful. And what we're kind of looking at here in terms of scope is, a lot of people, when you talk to people about DevOps, they get stuck in this idea of, CI/CD and automation and a pipeline. And what really could be the missing opportunity here is kind of before and after, right? If we're looking at a stream, we have entry points all over the place. We have people jumping in at different times. We have animals in the stream. We have rocks in the stream. We have logs and debris in the stream clogging it up, right? Getting in the way and impeding our flow. And we also have streams connecting to streams, right? So if we're just looking at the CI/CD pipeline, if we're thinking in terms of piping, it's difficult to see the real complexity that's going on because it's not all pipes connecting to pipes, right? We have teams, we have behaviors, we have culture, we have manual activities that are factored in here. And so I just find this a really valuable paradigm. And it's a little bit different, but it's just different enough to kind of refocus our thinking. So I want to kind of ask the group here, if you're fast, in a DevOps context, we can think that a delivery team is really fast to release, to build, to automate. But if your approval process is slow, or your marketing process is slow, or your documentation process is slow, can you really say that you're fast? right? In the grand scheme of things, in the big picture of a customer getting value, can we really say that we're performing really well? And if 90% of your tickets take longer than a sprint, you know you have a problem, but what can you sort of do about that, right? How do you sort of zoom back out and say, okay, well, what's the real cause of this? What could be affecting this, and how can we solve it? And if we look in the context of delivering a single change to customers, what could be involved in that, right? We've got backlog grooming, we have success and support at the other end. Put in the chat, I'd love to hear from you. If you've been in an organization where documentation and success and marketing happens after you've deployed and released the software. You know, this is something that I find all the time. And it's because we focus so much on, you know, our area and optimizing our area. And we might miss the things that are upstream from us and downstream from us. And we want to go beyond DevOps as another silo, right? It's really dangerous for teams to think of DevOps as, you know, this group that we hand work to and they hand it back when it's done. And trying to integrate that into a stream and having all of our activities in a stream, I think is the way that we optimize for flow and get those best results. So I'd love to hear, you know, how you measure flow, whether you're measuring flow from when you have an idea to when a customer is using the software, or flow is within a DevOps team or in a product team. I'd love to hear that, and I'd love to talk about that. I'd love to hear different experiences. But really, when I talk about visibility, I find one of the most valuable things about the concept of a value stream is that we can look at it at different resolutions. We can look at the program level. You know, up top in the slide here, we're looking at sort of a program level where we have, actually not a program level. This is let's say a software delivery process. We have a staging deploy, which we think is a bottleneck. We can now use the idea of the stream to sort of zoom in and look at a finer level, where is the bottleneck within that bottleneck, right? And we can sort of chase it, but just having these ideas, right? If you ask your team, what's our bottleneck, and you ask 8 different people, you're going to get 8 different answers, right? So how do we then diagnose those, right? How do we dig into them to find out where the real bottleneck is, how much it's actually costing us, how much it's actually impacting us, and what to do about it? And I'd love to hear, you know, how you're illustrating this right now. Like, how do you chase bottlenecks? How do you surface them to the team? And how does your team attack bottlenecks? Some of the kind of value I see of visualizing this in terms of a stream and a value stream map, which is my area of expertise. When we draw out a value stream map, what happens is we have 20% of the waste in the system sort of just appears, right? It kind of becomes highlighted because we can compare apples to apples. We can say, you know, this is obviously taking too long, or this is clearly not that valuable. And what I've seen in teams is a 12-month process get reduced to 3 months. And I've seen 3-month processes get reduced to 3 weeks. But what's universally consistent in almost every single case is that upon drawing the map, we can identify where the big problems are. And that leads us to these kind of easy actions where if everyone's in the room sharing the same vision, we can make these decisions about what we should do next. And that often means, you know, we just stop doing 1 or 2 things that we're doing right now, and it makes a massive difference. So if we're looking at measurement, we're looking at how do we measure these things? How do we measure flow? How do we measure a team in the context of a value stream? It really starts with timing. And I think this is really important. You know, it's really important to measure. It's really important to have the ability to measure, because when was the last time your boss said to you, just do as well this year as we did last year? You know, just do the same things. We'll just, you know, double down and ride this out for as long as it lasts, right? I don't think that's the case. And it's not often the case in my experience. I hear us constantly pushing the envelope, not on an annual basis, but we're consistently and constantly trying to do this. And so it matters what kind of data we're collecting in order to measure. And if we haven't started, something like a value stream map can really kickstart that. We're talking about a couple of hours together collaboratively. Online is fine. We can work together to map this out and get some really valuable measurements very easily to move us in the right direction. And we can go from there. This can get really sophisticated, but what I really want to get across is this idea that measurement doesn't have to be really challenging. It really doesn't have to be onerous. You don't have to add automation or tooling in order to measure. We can measure as long as you have a stopwatch, as long as you have ideas about how long things are taking, and we can share that view across a team. We can figure it out. So from a measurement perspective, we really want to look beyond CI/CD. And that kind of brings me to the concept of the value stream as a method of measuring DevOps metrics specifically. We can measure the performance of a process, but hopefully everyone's seen the DORA 4 key metrics for DevOps. I'll post a note in the chat if anyone hasn't heard of it and they're really interested. But it gives us these 4 really valuable metrics for looking at performance. And what they really fit well is a value stream, because we're talking about lead time. We're talking about start to finish. We're talking about these measurements that should be layered on top of a view that encompasses the entire picture, right? So the value stream really accomplishes that. It gives us a good framework for layering on these super valuable metrics, and we can collect these really quickly. We can use a value stream map to collect these without having to implement a bunch of automation and tooling. So what does this actually look like in practice, right? We want to see an example. So this is a simplified value stream, but what we want to look at really here is the fact that we just have steps and timing. And that's enough for us to kind of highlight 2 opportunities, right? 2 areas. This might be a risk, this might be an opportunity, but we know that 2 sections here, 1 and 2, are taking longer than everything else. And notably longer than everything else. It's pretty stark, the difference. We're talking about hours versus minutes in this case. And I'd love to know if in the chat, let me know if you've run a session like this, if you've done a map like this, if you've done any sort of value stream mapping. Toss a thumbs up in the chat. Let us know. I'd love to compare notes. I'd love to hear your experiences. What works? What's really hard about it? What was surprising? I'd love to talk throughout the conference about that stuff. So I would say that this isn't a really common view of a value stream map. That can be really complex. If you look at Wikipedia, it's a mess. But really, I would suggest starting with this. You can start with timing and layer on additional detail. But what does this get us when we start looking at timing and start looking at a value stream? This is an example case from a client of mine where what they wanted to do was implement automated deployment. So we had a bottleneck that we wanted to tackle, and we said, okay, well, let's map it out to make sure that we do this in the right way and we do it in the right place. And by looking at the value stream, we had these 2 areas that you'll notice are not related to automated deployment. We have environment creation and we have we have a testing opportunity with acceptance testing. And these are taking way more than our artifact deployment step. We're talking about like 12, 15 minutes for artifact deployment and hours with the testing and environment creation. So, that the map actually pointed us in a different direction. And it's good because it saved us, millions of dollars that we were going to dedicate towards something like automated deployment. You go down the road, set this all up, and it wouldn't really make a big difference in terms of the bottom line, in terms of moving the needle. But by highlighting these 2 other opportunities, we can have this discussion, right? And there's a really big difference here between hours and minutes. And I want to kind of highlight that for the purposes of illustration. But we can have really interesting conversations and really valuable conversations with the team as a result of having an asset like this by saying, yes, 11 hours is lower than 20 hours, but what happens if halfway through this stream we have rework, right? Something's not working, we have to kick it back. That 11 hours might become 22 hours. It might become 16 hours, right? And we can sort of compare closer to apples and apples. And I think that's really valuable. So once we have the data, once we have the visualization, we can have those conversations, we can move forward with confidence and be aligned and on the same page. So I think it can be a really valuable tool for your team to settle arguments before they happen, to really illustrate to you in leadership that you're sharing the same view as people on the ground who are doing the work, the people who are contributing on a daily basis. How can you have the same vision and stay aligned with them? Having a map like this can really help bridge that gap. And then beyond this stage, we have things like value stream management, where with value stream management, you can begin to automate all of this collection, right? And I would suggest you start with mapping, but really any start is going to make a difference. If you're moving towards value streams as a concept in value stream thinking, and to kind of emphasize the value on the management side, Nationwide was an example from 2018. They looked at their value stream performance when they just started down the road of value stream management, and they found that their developers were only spending 2.8% of their time actually building code, writing code. And by shifting to looking at the value stream and managing from a value stream perspective, they went from a 3-year release cycle down to 3 months the next year. And that was all from shifting their thinking and changing what they measured and adding this visibility to find out what was really happening. And I'd love to hear whether you're using a value stream management solution right now, if you're measuring these things, whether it's automated or manual. Let us know in the chat. Let's talk about it. I'd love to hear from you. If I can post a survey, I will, but let us know in the chat, and I'd love to carry on the conversation. So we're going to get into some sticky material now. Value, I know, is it's a hot topic, and I love it because it's so complex and it's so interesting, and we hear a lot of perspectives on it. And I hear a lot of people say that it measures effort, it measures quality, it can measure time. So I'm not gonna present my opinion on this, but I will challenge those ideas. I think that we need to look beyond these measurements and start to think in terms of customers and what they really want, right? We know that value is in the eye of the beholder. How are we measuring what is being contributed to that value? And as an individual contributor back earlier in my career, I remember, I would have trouble all the time building things that ultimately had no value because I didn't have a view to the customer. I didn't have a clear understanding of what the aligned goals were, the North Star, how my work was contributing to the bottom line. And I think that having a value stream view earlier and more available to me would have been incredibly valuable in my efforts to deliver value. And certainly with my understanding of what is valuable and what's not valuable. And I don't know if you see this, but I hear from a lot of people that, they're engineers, they get obsessed with the tool, they get obsessed with the solution, and, they want to chase it at top speed without asking what is the value, right? What is the value to the customer? And so, without defining this, I think it's really valuable for us to think in terms of 3 main types of value and how they sort of connect and interplay with each other. And you can sort of dig further into this if you want to look up Bain, elements of value, and B2B value. I can throw some links in to the chat to dig into this if you're really interested. But it's easiest to start with business value. It's the thing we know the most, right? We understand it because we're in it all the time. But we can also consider employee value, customer value when we are trying to move the needle and trying to improve things. So I think to make this really easy with teams and to start considering this and measuring it, we can ask a couple questions. What is the value of each individual step, right? Of each individual artifact in the value stream? And how are we adding value at each stage, right? We should be enhancing value as we progress through the value stream. So we want to make sure that we're doing that. And we want to make sure that we ask our teams and we have this dialogue with our teams about how are we adding value? I think it really goes back to that, where are we aiming, right? And then how are we doing is the measurement of, are we consistently improving value? Are we consistently adding value? And that brings me to close to the end, complexity. I think what we want to do is move from silos to systems with DevOps. We don't want this to be an isolated thing. We want this to be affecting our organizations and our customers. And I think the value stream paradigm and value stream thinking really allows us to do that in a very constructive way. It gives us that framework that can get us thinking in the right direction and acting in the right direction. And me personally, I see value streams everywhere. There's some examples here of how a platform team affects a web app stream, and a web app stream is affecting your mobile app, and all of these things connect together. How can we visualize that? How are you doing it right now? How are you seeing where a bottleneck in your platform team is affecting your other delivery teams, right? How are you seeing that the approval process within your mobile app is delaying your marketing efforts, right? How is all of that visible, and how can we make it visible? And I think that there's a lot we can get from techniques like value stream mapping and tooling to really gather that view and manage that complexity. And I would encourage you to sort of tackle your value streams and really look for those bottlenecks, and do what you can to focus on bottlenecks rather than what we think the ideal is, or what we think the next thing that we should automate is. Is it a bottleneck? I think it should be. And really, that one of the key messages of this is really start where you are. I really want to encourage people to just look at what's going on right now, because that's the easiest way for us to head in the right direction and make the next activities and actions and plans that we do as valuable as possible. And I see value streams in every iteration, every workflow, every process in our organizations. And so, I would encourage you to look at them, because once you sort of adopt this way of thinking, you will see these opportunities everywhere. This value and these opportunities for improving flow just arise, and they stay visible, and they really start to affect the amount of value that you're able to deliver at the end of the day. If you'd like to learn more, chat, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to keep this conversation going. Feel free to book some time with me at meet.visible.is. And we can keep it going from there. And I hope you enjoyed this talk. I hope you enjoy the conference. And I really appreciate you coming to my session. Thank you very much.